Single dad, walked 10 miles for a job interview, not knowing the CEO was watching him the whole time. The kettle starts to whisper before the sky is fully awake. He knows the window by the sink will fog in the next few breaths, and he knows the cereal will soften too quickly if he pours the milk before she climbs into the chair with her drowsy smile. The quiet before her footsteps feels like a held note. He draws in the steam, lets it warm his chest, and looks at the paper folded on the counter. The corner bears the office letterhead and a time scrawled in ink, and underneath it his own careful notes. Questions he rehearsed the night before when the apartment was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of a cheap wall clock. She pads in with one sock on. He kneels to tug on the other and kisses her hairline, breathing in shampoo and sleep. Cereal clinks, milk pours, and the light outside grows into the faintest suggestion of day. He sets coffee in a chipped mug and watches her draw a sun on a napkin with a crayon rescued from beneath the couch. "A sun for luck," she says, and he smiles and folds the napkin and tucks it into the inside pocket of his jacket. The jacket is thrift store new, an almost fit, a good enough shoulder seam. His shirt is ironed from last night's effort, and the tie is knotted in a way he practiced with a mirror and an old tutorial. He checks his phone and sees a different kind of weather. Alerts stack like little stop signs. Service interruptions. Routes suspended until further notice. He reads the words twice and feels the floor tilt a fraction in a way that would not be noticeable to anyone else. The bus is not coming. He looks toward the window, where the parking lot shimmers with dew, and the car waits with its dead-eyed blankness. The battery did not forgive him for the cold, or the long weeks of neglect. He had hoped for a miracle at dawn, but silence answers him. He wipes his hands on a dish towel and closes his eyes for the span of a heartbeat, letting disappointment pass through him so it has less weight. A message pings from a friend who had promised a ride if work let up. "Sorry, tied up." He reads it without resentment. Everyone is juggling something. He stares at the clock and then at the folded letter. He looks at the sketch of a sun printed in wax on a napkin against his chest. He thinks of the note slipped beneath his door the day before. Polite, but firm. He thinks of a voice on the phone that said the power bill has rolled into the kind of red that grades itself. He thinks of a cupboard that echoes. He rinses the cereal bowl and teeth chatter when her laugh bumps the silence. He tells her again where she will spend the morning, and who will make pancakes, and how he will be back before she finishes drawing a second sundae. She nods as if this is as simple as tying shoes. He ties her laces and the knot holds on the first try, a small victory tucked into the larger battlefield. The trusted neighbor opens to their knock, a robe closed at the waist and a kitchen already lively with the scent of oranges and toast. The radio murmurs a song from a decade ago. The neighbor tucks a stray curl behind the child's ear and promises to call if anything is needed. They have done this before, in smaller emergencies. He crouches to look at his daughter at eye level and says the line he always says, "Be brave, be kind, listen." She repeats it in a sing-song voice and throws her arms around his neck, and for a second he leans into that small harbor. On the way back to his place, he counts his coins without counting. They feel like chips in a game he never asked to play. Even if a bus were magically waiting, he would come up short. The coffee has cooled in the time it took to make peace with the facts. There is only one way to the interview now. He studies the map in his mind, the way the city unspools from his door to the glass building where his name is on a visitor log. It is far. It is far enough to question the soles of his shoes and the clock's patience. It is far enough to make someone consider turning back. He pulls on those shoes anyway. He tucks the resumes into a plastic sleeve he saved from a school folder, the kind with a clear front to keep fingerprints from smudging hopes. He slides the napkin sun on top. He fills a bottle with water and pockets a granola bar. One hand flicks the switch to off all the way around the apartment to save pennies that do not want to be saved. He locks the door and tests the knob, and takes the stairs instead of the elevator because movement feels like a promise to the day. The street greets him with a pale wash of light and the click of a bicycle down the block. A dog on a stoop lifts its ears and then dismisses him as unthreatening. He takes the first corner, and then the next, keeping a pace that could be mistaken for leisure, if not for the way his jaw sets and the way he does not really see the morning glory creeping along a fence. He is counting breaths, not flowers. He is rehearsing answers under his breath. He is remembering the way the interviewer's voice sounded on the call, measured, curious, practical. 10 miles, he tells himself, as if the naming of a distance could carve it into manageable pieces. 10 miles is the length between the place where he has been and the place where he might stand with a badge that opens doors and makes promises official. 10 miles is rent that does not need to be begged for more time. 10 miles is a refrigerator that no longer needs to echo. The day around him is shiny with possibility and heavy with the knowledge of past letdowns. He keeps walking. A bus passes him on a route that does not help him, people press to the windows, faces lit by the glow of screens. He watches it and does not let longing dig into his heel. He adjusts his step to avoid a puddle left by an overzealous sprinkler, then blends back into the steady rhythm he plans to keep. He thinks of the last time he went this far on foot, a protest march when he was younger and his feet were less known to him. He smiles at the memory. That day he chanted. Today he keeps his voice to himself, shaping honest answers that will not oversell him, answers that refold the messy truth of the last few years into something coherent. He passes a bakery where the air tastes like sugar and yeast. He thinks of surprising his daughter after, if an after exists, with a flaky treat that crumbles in her lap and makes her laugh when the powder dusts her nose. He clocks the corner store that sells interviews in the form of 2 shiny shoes and cheap cologne, and he continues past it. He is who he is, and the scent he carries is laundry detergent and resolve. A car idles at a light on the opposite side of the boulevard, windows polished to a mirror. He glances without seeing himself and looks away to the crosswalk. The signal gives him permission and he steps forward. Somewhere he cannot know, someone may be watching, someone with the time to notice a man in a suit too thin for the early chill and shoes that have known more pavement than they were designed to. He does not feel those eyes. He only feels the drag in his calves scream in a language he understands, and the quiet answer he gives them, not yet. The sun finds its confidence as the city blooms into chatter. He walks. A man calling out headlines at a stand nods to him. A cyclist rings a bell in warning and flies by. He takes note of the shadows, of how they stretch from the buildings like long fingers that cannot quite reach him. He breathes, he drinks, he adjusts his tie. When the knot nudges sideways, he keeps the pace. He keeps the promise. He pictures a hand slipping into his at the end of the day and a voice saying, "You did it." He calculates the remaining streets without admitting to himself that he is calculating. He will get there. He has to. The day does not care about the why behind his stride, only the what, and this what is simple. Walk, arrive, sit down and tell the truth in a way that makes a door open. He is a father who has learned how to make meals from thin air and games out of nothing and hope that renews every morning no matter what the night delivered. He lets that be his rhythm more than the slap of his soles against concrete. At a red light he pulls the napkin sun from his pocket and looks at it as if it knows something about the distance between where he stands and where he needs to be. It is a child's circle, bright and bold, with lines shooting outward, in a burst that does not apologize for taking up space. He tucks it back with care and steps off the curb when the world tells him it is time. The day moves around him. He moves through it. Somewhere far ahead is a glass building, and inside a door with his name written in marker on a temporary badge, and behind that the possibility of a steadiness he has not felt in too long. The morning opens into that possibility like a bloom, and he walks toward it, one honest step after another. He left before dawn, the apartment still heavy with the quiet of sleep and warmed milk. A tiny sock lay in the hallway like a reminder to be careful where he stepped. He tucked a lunch note beneath a magnet on the fridge, the one shaped like a smiling sun his kid loved to move from corner to corner, and he whispered a promise to be back before bedtime. He checked the folded resumes again, slid them into a plastic sleeve, and wedged that into the inner pocket of his jacket. The jacket was too warm for the season, but it had deep pockets, and a way of making him feel put together. The shoes on his feet were polished until they shone, although the leather at the toes had thinned and the heel on the right one clicked in a way he could not fix. He tied the laces tight, double-knotted, and stepped into the pale morning. The first few blocks lifted him. There is strength in starting. He felt it with each step, the streetlight glow fading, the sky beginning its quiet blue. He rehearsed without sound. Then let the words come, careful and steady, like a runner, counting breaths. Tell me about yourself. I am someone who shows up. My hands have learned different kinds of work, and I like the feeling that comes from doing a job right. What is your greatest strength? Reliability. I keep my word, and I adapt, He did not add that he had learned to adapt because life had shoved him into corners he had not imagined, and he had found a way out because of a face that looked like his own reflected in rain-flecked bus windows. Wind picked up and snuck under the collar of his jacket. The clouds moved in a slow herd, then broke, then returned. The city woke by sections. A bakery's door opened, and a warm drift of sweet air slipped past him. His stomach tightened, then eased. He checked the route in his mind again, the turn after the park, the long road that paralleled the river, the crosswalk that never seemed to change in his favor. He had seen a rumor online of a bus detour, a promise that a certain side street could shave time, but the last time he believed a rumor he ended up waiting, and waiting is something he could not afford. He kept to the wider road even though it added distance. Predictable ground was safer than a shortcut that might turn into a detour to nowhere. By the time the first light rain started, his socks had warmed, and the click in his right heel had become a rub. He took a receipt from his pocket, folded it into a small strip, and slid it under his heel. It was a trick he had learned on job sites when boots wore thin before paychecks arrived. The rain did not commit. It came in a mist, tapered off, then returned at an angle that seemed devised to find the gap at the back of his neck. He ignored it. He thought instead about answers to the harder questions. Why did you leave your last job? Company changes, new direction. He did not add that shifts seemed to shrink after he asked for steady hours so he could pick up from daycare. What is the gap on your resume? Family. It would be the truth, and there is honor in telling the truth without apology. At a traffic light, a car coughed once, then again, then died in the middle lane. The driver looked stricken, hands fluttering as if trying to coax the engine back to life. The line behind the car lengthened, horns began to sound, small first, then meaner. He glanced at the time on the wall clock in his head, and knew he should keep moving. He moved toward the car. The driver opened the door with a guilty expression, already saying sorry to a city that does not care. He asked if the car was in park, and if the wheel was straight, then he nodded toward the curb. The two of them leaned into the metal mass, and it began to move. It always feels impossible, until it does. Shoes slid on the wet paint, the soles searching for grip that was just an idea, until it became real. They pushed until the car kissed the curb, and the angry line peeled away. He looked under the hood, although the tangle there might as well have been a city map written in a language he did not speak. He asked if there was gas, if the car had been doing this, if roadside help had been called. The driver shook a phone at him, voice shaky, then offered a ride. As thanks once help arrived, he tugged the plastic sleeve in his jacket to make sure it was still there and smiled. The offer was kind, but kindness sometimes eats time without meaning to. He pointed up the road and said he had to keep a promise. He gave a small wave and returned to the long stretch of pavement that did not care about reasons. Cars hissed by. One slowed, a van with a hand dangling out the passenger window, an offer of a lift delivered with a grin and a shout. He thought about the seat he would sink into, the 5 minutes that could become 10 with a wrong turn, the talk that could lead them past the boulevard he needed. He shook his head, lifted a hand in thanks, and kept walking. He did not trust shortcuts that depended on anyone but himself. There were already too many pieces in his life that moved according to other people's clocks. The rain left. Sun arrived with a bang, bright off the river, the air turning thick. He loosened his collar and rolled his sleeves. He counted breaths again, not because he was running, but because there is comfort in measured things. At the halfway point, he allowed himself to think about the call he would make later, the voice he would try to keep light and joking, the report he would give about the day that did not include the ache in his feet, or the place where the right shoe pinched his small toe into fire. He touched the jacket pocket like a superstitious ritual, checked again for the crispness of paper that meant possibility. He rehearsed the question he feared most. How will you manage the schedule? He pictured a calendar covered in colored blocks, the people he could ask for help, the way he could trade early mornings for late nights, if someone would just give him a chance to prove he could be counted on. I will manage it the way I have managed everything. I will be there. I will ask for clarity and I will plan. He said it out loud and it sounded like conviction. Traffic grew thicker as he neared the part of the city where buildings wore mirrored skin. He passed a narrow alley that promised to cut off a corner. A truck had wedged itself half inside. a crew standing around it, with clipboards and hard hats and an air of confusion. He stayed on the main road. He passed a convenience store and thought of buying water, but the lines stretched to the door and lines steal time in tiny sips. He kept going, mouth dry, breath steady, heartbeat a metronome. He did not notice the car that kept pace a few lengths back. It had been behind him long enough to know he did not dawdle, that he walked with the even insistence of someone who cannot afford to stop. It had idled at the light while he pushed the stalled car. It had watched him refuse a ride. It moved when he moved, then slowed when he slowed to retie the lace on his left shoe that had worked itself free, as if it, too, were testing his patience. The last stretch hurt. There is no other word. The rub became raw. His calves tightened, and his thoughts drifted in circles. He pulled them back to simple things. Left foot, right foot, breathe in, breathe out. He pictured his kid's drawing tucked into the plastic sleeve as a secret amulet, a blocky figure with a smile and a square sun in the corner. He felt for it and it steadied him. When the building finally rose in front of him, all glass and sharp lines, he did not hurry. He composed himself on the sidewalk, took one long drink from the fountain near the lobby entrance, and used a napkin from his pocket to wipe his face and the dust that had settled on his shoes. He stood straight, rolled his shoulders until they sat where they were supposed to, and chose the door that would not stick. He reached for the handle with a hand that did not shake. Somewhere across the street a car eased to a quiet stop. He looked ahead, not behind, unaware of the eyes that had been on him since the morning, seeing only the hinge of a possibility opening. He first saw the man as the car rolled to a slow stop at the end of a long block. The kind of morning where the air still clung to its pale chill, and the city had not yet snapped into full noise. The man was walking with a steady pace along the sidewalk, jacket too light for the breeze, shoes scuffed, a worn folder tucked close to his side. A bus hissed by, and kept going. The man did not flag it. He adjusted the strap of his bag and kept on. It was nothing at first, just another figure in a morning full of figures, a person pulled along by the gravity of what awaited. The car moved on. The city opened like a single wide mouth and swallowed the moment. There were calls to make, and a calendar that did not forgive, but the image kept nudging at the edge of thought. A person walking, not rushing, not dragging, simply putting one foot in front of the other with a kind of quiet intent. A few blocks later, there he was again. The same jacket, the same folder, its corners softened by time. The man was crossing at the light, letting a woman in heels go first. He nodded to the traffic cop, then continued, unbothered by the cold bite of the wind that tugged at his sleeves. He was not looking at his screen. He was looking where he was going. By the time the car pulled up under the shadow of the building's glass, the sight had traveled with the watcher into the marbled cool of the lobby. The day's stack of priorities was already waiting on the desk upstairs, but curiosity, gentle and unexpected, had begun to tug. It was not the curiosity of spectacle. It was the small human question behind a passing scene. Where was the man going? And why on foot? And how far had he come? On the way to the elevator, he paused and looked out across the plaza through the high windows. The man had reached the far side of the block, now pausing to retie a stubborn shoe. He stood on one foot, balanced against the groove in the stone planter, and fixed it neatly. Then he wiped the toe against the back of his calf to knock away grit. The folder never left his arm. He lifted his head, took in the height of the building, and drew a breath you could read as steadiness even through the glass. Upstairs, he called down to the security desk without thinking of it as unusual. It began as a quick question, spoken in a low tone, as if to keep it from becoming more than what it was. "There is a man coming in," he said. "Charcoal jacket, canvas folder with a frayed edge. He looks like he has walked a long way. Make sure he knows where to go. Make sure he is all right." The reply came in the even voice of a desk guard who had seen everything and tried not to make too much of anything. Got him on the plaza now. He asked for directions, said he was here for an interview. Polite, calm. "Let me know if you want me to offer anything more." "No fuss," he said. "Just keep an eye out." He found himself glancing at the cameras every so often through the morning. The man did not ask for water. He did not ask to sit closer to the heaters. He took a place on a bench in the lobby and checked the contents of his folder, his shoulders set as if he were shielding the papers from a draft. When he shifted the bundle, a small drawing slipped up from the inner sleeve, bright color against the dull office tones, a scribbled sun with uneven rays. He touched it gently with his fingertips and slid it back with a care that made the watcher feel like an intruder on something private and tender. Single father, he thought, not because of any label on a form but because of the way the man's eyes softened at the sight of that little picture, the kind of softness that comes from being counted on. He asked the desk to check again. The guard went over on the pretext of routine, offered directions once more, asked if the man needed anything. The man smiled and said he was fine. He stood when a custodian came by to mop under the bench and thanked him, as if he had just been served at a table. When the guard gestured to the cafe for a cup of water, he nodded his thanks and took a sip, careful with the lid, careful with his suit, careful with everything, as someone who has learned that care is cheaper than repair. With each small check, curiosity gave way to something else, a kind of respect that arrived not with a trumpet but like the slow spread of sunlight across a conference table, a steady illumination making ordinary things look different. There was no complaint in the way the man moved, no grimacing or stretching, as if to make sure everyone knew he had come a long distance. There was only a straightforward purpose. He presented his name at the desk and did not announce inconvenience. He watched the clock not with a jitter of worry, but with the rhythm of someone who has already lost time and chosen not to lose any more. He thought of how many mornings he had seen people bark at the valet or the barista when a minute was not theirs to command. He thought of the drivers who blocked crosswalks with an impatience that clothed itself as importance, of the tempered glass that rattled when someone slapped a closed fist against the elevator door. And then he thought of this man, who had risen such a distance ahead of his scheduled time that the morning could not claim it back, who had relied on his feet like a promise he intended to keep. The guard called up once without being asked. He is headed to the elevators now. He's got the smile again. He asked where the restroom is, just for a moment, and then he's going up. Good, he said. Tell the receptionist to make sure he is comfortable, and if he needs a moment more before he starts, let him have it, but do not tell him it is special. Let it be natural. He watched as the man stood by the column, waited for the doors to open, stepped back so a woman with a stroller could wheel herself through the clearing. He held the door from the inside, one arm out, the folder shifted under his elbow, a small act that cost him balance, but did not cost him grace. When the elevator filled, and it seemed for a second that he might not fit, another person scooted aside, and he went in with a soft word of thanks. The doors closed, and there was nothing left to see on the screen but a reflection of the lobby. He stood by the window and looked down at the city where the morning was now fully awake, where sirens braided and unbraided in the distance, and steam lifted from vents like breath. He did not feel like a spy. He felt like someone who had been allowed to witness a simple truth without asking for it. Not every journey announces itself. Some arrive carrying only the weight of their own quiet. He would meet the man later, perhaps. Or he would let the process do its sensible work and greet him only with fairness. For now he let the respect settle in, unadorned by the easy story of hardship. The man had not auditioned for pity. He had brought nothing but presence. The watcher had seen enough to know that sometimes the strongest signal of character is not the drama around a path, but the calm endurance of it. A step, then another, without needing to tell anyone how far it had been. He reached the lobby exactly when he was expected, shoes dusted white with dried salt, shirt clinging in damp crescents, hair matted by the long walk and the wind that had chased him across town. The building rose in columns of glass that reflected a sky trying to decide between brightness and rain. Inside, light pooled across polished stone and the scent of coffee, mixed with the faint bite of toner. He paused at the revolving door only long enough to catch his breath, then stepped into the cool and let his pulse settle. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile that faltered, at a wrinkle, at a scuffed heel, at the way his jacket did not sit smoothly on his shoulders. He named his appointment and the company he was there to see. She asked for identification, and he fumbled with careful hands, aware of every scrape on his knuckles. The walk had left marks, but the clock on the wall smiled at him. He was not late. Other candidates were arranged along the far wall like fresh coins, glimmering and neat. Suits pressed into perfect seams, shoes that reflected their own patience, hands busy with screens. There was a tightening at the edge of a mouth, a sideways glance he felt more than saw. He met no eyes. He took a seat near a potted plant and loosened his grip on his portfolio so the slip of paper tucked inside would not crinkle any more than it already had. His child's drawing had traveled with him through rain and sun and one long block after another. It always came on important days. A rattle came from the bank of office machines near the elevator. A young staffer, face flushed, tugged at a sheet that had folded itself into stubborn corners inside a printer. The machine blinked and hissed, feeding on the frustration in the room. The receptionist kept glancing over, torn between protocol and the fear of making things worse. He watched, waiting to be called, and felt the old impulse surface, the one that had kept him steady in jobs where he became the person who solved small problems before they became big ones. He stood, lifted his portfolio under his arm, and approached with a light touch that asked permission before words did. "May I try?" he said softly. The staffer stepped back, relief plain and embarrassed. He knelt so his face was level with the open tray. He ran his fingers along the track, found where the paper had torn, coaxed it out in patient strips rather than ripping and compounding the jam. The printer clicked. He loosened the side panel, checked the rollers, realigned the guides to the correct width, gently reseated the cartridge. He pressed the green light. The machine whirred into harmony and spit out a clean page. The staffer exhaled, a laugh breaking from somewhere they had not planned. He smiled, wiped his hands on a napkin offered by a passing courier, and returned to his seat without asking for anything. The receptionist mouthed a thank you and slid a small cup of water across the desk. He nodded. He held the cup with both hands like it might spill his chance, if he was careless. He thought of small hands at a breakfast table, of a cereal bowl placed carefully so it would not tip, of shoes tied in quick double loops, of a neighbor's promise to stay until he came back. The drawing in his portfolio pressed its presence into his palm. A little sun and a crooked house, stick figures with smiles bigger than their heads. The room continued to perform its silent choreography. Interviews began. Names were called. People stood quickly and smoothed jackets, as if that gesture could iron away nerves. He remained seated, patient, as the plant next to him. He watched a courier shift a heavy box near the door, and rose to hold it open, letting an eddy of warm street air curve around his ankles. He gave up his seat for an older visitor who came in clutching a folder to her chest. He returned a lost badge someone had left on the coffee table. He did these things with the modesty of habit. From a high mezzanine, behind softly tinted glass, the leader of the company watched the lobby the way some people watch the ocean, looking for patterns in the tide. He had arrived early with an untouched coffee and a mind that liked to observe what job titles seldom let him see. He had asked quietly, the night before, to leave the cameras on and the blinds slightly open. He wanted to know who smiled when no one asked for a smile, who arrived when they should and what they did when the world looked away. He saw the man come in from the street, marked by weather and effort, but not by complaint. He noticed the glance from the receptionist, the brief defensiveness, the kindness that followed. He watched how the man stood when the printer faltered. Not to be seen but because the moment asked it. He saw the steady bow of his head over stubborn paper, the gentle way he explained what he was doing without making the staffer feel small. He noticed the cup of water accepted with restraint, the door held without drama, the seat offered to a stranger. He watched a father flick a glance at his silent phone and tuck it away as if tucking a worry into a pocket for later. Time passed. In the lobby, it was measured by the ebb and flow of people, by the changing angle of sun on the floor, by the way the receptionist relaxed her shoulders each time a small crisis resolved itself. Some of the candidates whispered to each other and typed messages with sharp fingers. Some pretended not to see the man in the wrinkled jacket. A few looked at him and then away, like a draft of air they could ignore. It was not new. He rolled his shoulders and let the noise of the building muffle the drum of his pulse. The leader upstairs signaled for a slight delay in the schedule. A quiet instruction hovered on the lobby phone. "Let us see," he murmured, "how patience holds when it is asked to wait a little more." He did not suspect petulance in the man below. He suspected steadiness. Still, he watched. A student of the mundane. The way some coach watches how a player sits on a bench, rather than how they run the field. When the delay came, the man accepted it, with a nod too small to make anyone feel guilty. He took another sip of water and folded his portfolio closed, the drawing safely tucked back inside. He did not try to draw attention. He did not disparage anyone else. He simply continued to be the person who made room, who handed over a pen that had rolled off a lap, who thanked the cleaner for lifting a stray cup. He was not performing kindness, he was inhabiting it. The call came at last. The receptionist smiled like someone who had been rooting for an outcome. He rose, thanking her, thanking the staffer whose printer now purred. He smoothed the front of his shirt as best he could and adjusted the strap of his bag so it would not slump. As he followed the hallway toward the interview rooms, the leader left his glass refuge and walked the longer way down to greet him, not yet as a title, but as another person in a corridor. Down in the lobby, the printer hummed with quiet satisfaction, and the plant by the chairs leaned a little toward the light. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner, a clean, neutral scent meant to calm nerves. He sat where the recruiter pointed and folded his hands to keep them from fidgeting. The table was smooth and cool beneath his palms. A pitcher of water sweated on a coaster between them, and he read the label on the glass to keep from staring back at the panel. One person scanned a printed resume, another balanced a tablet against a knee. At the end sat a quiet figure who said nothing, a presence as steady as a clock on a wall. "Thank you for coming," the first interviewer said. "We appreciate your time. Can you walk us through your most recent role?" He nodded. He kept his voice even. He talked about the warehouse, how aisles had turned into bottlenecks and orders into apologies, and how rearranging high-turn items closer to the packing stations cleared the choke points. He described how he paired new hires with calm veterans and split complex tasks into smaller steps so training went faster. He measured his words with care, pulling forward the parts where he could show a habit of noticing what went wrong and fixing it piece by piece. "What did you lead?" the operations manager asked. "What did the team look like?" He explained how titles meant less than timing. At shift start, he led the short stand-up with 3 points only: safety, volume, and roadblocks. He set a simple whiteboard where anyone could write a jam without needing permission. He learned to read faces before metrics. He knew when a bad night at home would turn into a bad day on the floor, and he found a way to move people to tasks they could handle until they found their footing again. The finance lead leaned in. "How did you manage cost pressure?" He talked about the small daily acts that add up. He asked for permission to renegotiate with a vendor, not by demanding discounts, but by agreeing to consistent order patterns that lowered their own risk. He set up a return bin so damaged items were tracked, not tossed. He taught the team to handle packaging like it mattered because waste was money running down a drain. He did not inflate his role. He kept to what he had done with his own hands and what he had taught others to repeat. "There is a gap in your resume," the recruiter said. "Can you tell us about that?" He held her gaze. He spoke plainly. The plant closed. He took temporary work wherever it appeared, moving boxes at night and cleaning offices on weekends, while arranging his life around a child who needed him every morning. He said he was proud he did not break. He said he used that time to make sense of where he had fallen short before. He borrowed library books on lean principles. He practiced spreadsheet formulas until they were muscle memory. He signed up for a free course and built a practice dashboard on a hand-me-down laptop. He did not turn his hardships into a sales pitch. He told the truth and let it rest. "Tell us about a mistake," the operations manager said. He took a breath. He told them about pushing a new pick path too fast. He expected everyone to adapt on the first day, and the floor turned loud and tense. An order went to the wrong truck. He had to stop everything and walk the floor with a clipboard, asking each person to show what he had missed from their side. He apologized in front of the group. Before relaunching, he tested on a single section and wrote a checklist. He said he learned that speed without listening is just a louder form of slow. The quiet figure at the end still had not spoken, but he could feel their attention, steady and curious, as if this person had all day to listen. A presence outside the room mirrored it too, a silhouette at the far end of the corridor pausing near the glass, then moving on. Somewhere, a camera winked red, and a screen in an office upstairs caught the reflection of a man sitting straight with his hands unclenched. "How do you see yourself adding value here?" the finance lead asked. He smiled without showing teeth. He talked about the handoff between the floor and the front office, where miscommunications chew up time. He could be the bridge. He would build a cadence, a rhythm of short updates that translated what the floor felt into what the spreadsheet needed to know. He would keep a clean, visible flow of work, so surprises got fewer. He would set a training ladder, so no one felt stuck. He would be the person who arrives early, stays calm, and asks for clarity when he does not understand. His voice did not rise. He spoke as if describing a tool he had used many times, a familiar weight in his palm. Another question landed. How do you handle pressure? He said that pressure is not the same as panic. He had served a customer face-to-face, while a forklift died and the phone would not stop ringing. He broke the moment into tasks. Solve the immediate safety issue. Communicate the delay. Pull in help. Then later, after the adrenaline left, he wrote down what had failed and why. He built checklists against a future he could not predict. The recruiter glanced at the clock and then back at him. How was your morning? He took a sip of water. It was fine, he said. He woke early, made breakfast, left a note for his neighbor, who was kind enough to walk his child to the bus. The buses were off schedule today, so he planned for it. He walked here. The room went still for a beat, and he saw the operations manager's brow crease, not in judgment but in interest. From where? A voice asked. From home, he said. He smiled a little at the surprise on their faces. He did not talk about the blisters blooming in his shoes, or how the wind cut along the river. He did not mention the ache in his calves. He spoke about leaving early enough, that being late was never an option. He said that when he gives his word, the rest is logistics. It was not a story for sympathy. It was a fact about who he was. The quiet figure at the end finally jotted a note. The pen made a soft whisper against paper. Somewhere down the hall, the same figure was a face on a screen replaying his arrival that morning, shoulders set, jaw steady, crossing the lobby with damp cuffs and a determined step. The receptionist had offered coffee. He had asked for water. He had thanked everyone by title instead of name because the nameplates were turned away, and he did not presume. Details like that tend to stick with people who are used to noise. Any questions for us? The recruiter asked. He had a few. He asked about the tools they used to track orders, and where those tools lived. In the cloud, or on local machines. He asked how success would be defined in the first months, not in slogans but in tasks. He asked about the team he would be joining, what they cared about, what they argued about, what they laughed about. His questions were not a test. They were a way of imagining himself already useful. When it was done, he stood and shook hands. His grip was firm, but not insistent. He thanked them for their time. The quiet figure stood as well, offering a nod that was almost a bow. He could not know that the same person would ride the elevator up and watch him on the street below, heading back the way he came with shoulders a little lighter now. He could not know that someone with a corner office and a view had spent the morning noting not just his answers but the way he breathed through each question, as if he had been practicing for this kind of pressure for a long time. The door clicked shut behind him. He did not look back. He had said what he came to say. Outside, the day had warmed, and the sidewalk shone. He pulled in a breath and let it out slowly, then turned toward the avenue, already calculating the time it would take to get home in time for homework and dinner and the long, good quiet that comes after a day well used. The room had gone quiet after the last question, the kind of quiet that makes every clock tick sound like it is counting down something larger than time. The man sat with his palms on his knees and his shoes still damp from the road. He had answered straight, without decoration, in a voice that sometimes trembled, and then steadied when he spoke of his child. The hiring manager glanced down at a folder, then toward the door. There was a knock. It opened. The person who stepped in did not need an introduction. Even the air in the room shifted for a moment, like both a draft and a hush had moved through at the same time. The CEO looked at the man, and then at the chair across from him. "May I join you?" the CEO asked. The manager nodded and made room, and the CEO sat, not at the head, but at the side, as if this conversation needed only two people. "We have been following your journey," the CEO said. "Not just the path you took this morning, though we know it. The way you left before the sun rose. The way you paused at the corner where the bus should have come, then kept walking. The way you thanked the security officer at the gate, even though you were afraid that your shirt would create the wrong first impression. The way you apologized to the receptionist for the water on the floor by your shoes, and then asked for a napkin to clean it up yourself." The man blinked. He sat up straighter. He looked at the manager, who gave a small nod, as if to say, "This is exactly what you think it." "Island, we did not plan this as a test," the CEO said, "but we were made aware that someone was on foot from the far side of town and coming here for a chance. When you stood at the bridge, our driver saw you and offered a ride. You refused because you were worried about arriving with a stranger and not knowing the protocol. You tried to do it right. Later, you helped a woman lift a stroller over a curb instead of hurrying past. You stopped at the corner store to ask for directions, and when they offered to let you use the phone, you said you could find your way. You did. The man swallowed. He did not know where to put his hands. He thought of the bowl left in the sink at home, and a small hand waving from the apartment window, and a little voice telling him good luck. Character tells us more than a resume ever will, the CEO said. It tells us who you will be when the job gets hard, or when things go sideways, or when someone needs help, and it is not in your job description. Your choices this morning showed planning and grit. Your way of speaking to the people here showed respect. Your answers showed humility, without shrinking from what you can do. The CEO turned to the manager. I am going to make a decision now. The man felt his heart thud in his chest, a single heavy drum that made the room feel smaller and larger at once. We would like you to join us, the CEO said, today. If you say yes, we will make sure you have what you need to succeed. Not just a position, a partner in learning. You will have a mentor who will meet with you every week, and I will check on your progress myself from time to time. We will provide a starter bonus, so you can take a breath and steady the ground under your feet at home. And we will remove the distance between here and there as a barrier. There will be transportation assistance, whether that is a transit pass, rides, when needed, or help getting a reliable set of wheels. Logistics should not be the thing that stops talent from doing the work. He tried to speak, but his first attempt was only air. Then he said thank you, because that was all that would fit through the doorway of his mouth without breaking. You have not even asked what the title is, the CEO said, with a smile that softened the crispness of the room. I was thinking about my kid, the man said. About telling a small person that we are going to be okay. That, the CEO said, is exactly why I am sure. We will work with your schedule. Bring us the times that matter for your child, and we will plan your training so you can be both a parent and a professional. We do not want you to choose between them. The man wiped his face with the back of his hand. He remembered the moment this morning when the rain moved sideways and he wondered if this was foolish, if anyone would take a chance on someone who had to walk to the interview. Now he let the relief come, soft and quiet, so it would not drown out the rest of him. Do you accept? The CEO asked. I do, the man said. I will give you everything I have. Good, the CEO said. That is what got you here. Someone will bring you a towel and a fresh shirt. After that, we will handle the paperwork, and you can take home what you need. You will not be walking back, unless you want to. There is a car waiting. And before the end of the day, the bonus will be in your account. The manager stood and shook his hand. The grip was steady. The man rose, and his wet shoes made small sounds against the floor. He looked at the door, and then back at the CEO. One more thing, the CEO said. The distance you covered this morning was a long one. Keep that memory. On the days when you feel far from where you want to be, remember you already know how to close a gap. Outside the office, the hall smelled faintly of fresh coffee. A member of the staff came with a clean shirt still wrapped in tissue and a pair of dry socks. The man stepped into a small conference room to change. He caught a glimpse of himself in the dark glass and barely recognized the person standing there, not because the clothes were different, but because his posture had changed. The worry had not vanished, but it had been given a place to sit that was not right on his chest. When he came back out, the CEO was gone, but the promise remained like a footprint that did not fade when the floor dried. He walked toward the elevator, where the car would be waiting, and felt the day tilt in his favor. Somewhere across town, a small backpack was hanging on a chair, and a pair of sneakers were lined up by the door. He imagined opening that door tonight, and kneeling to say, "We did it." And that was enough to carry him forward, not just for the ride home, but into the work that would become the next part of their life. He woke before the first hint of light had softened the edges of the buildings, and the apartment was quiet except for the slow breath of his child in the next room. He dressed without turning on the overhead light, letting the dim glow from the street guide his hands as he buttoned his shirt and straightened the collar. The mirror showed a face that had learned to keep moving. He brushed his shoes until the leather shone faintly, then paused at the door to listen again for the hush of sleep down the hall. He whispered a promise that he would be back before the stars returned, then stepped into the hallway with his lunch tucked under his arm. The city was only beginning to stir when he reached the building. In the lobby, a security guard lifted a hand in greeting, and he returned the gesture with a quiet thank you. The coffee machine murmured, sending a ribbon of warmth into the air. He stood a moment to take it in. The glass lobby, the polished floor, the elevator doors he had once passed with a backpack and a heart pounding for different reasons. This time he carried a badge clipped to his shirt, and a start date circled on the calendar in his kitchen. This time he belonged. He arrived at his floor before the chatter began. The lights were gentle and steady, and his desk sat clean and waiting. A small potted plant leaned toward the window, as if it had been expecting him. He rested his hand on the chair back and felt a flutter in his chest. Not fear exactly, more like the buzz of a spring storm on the horizon. He took a breath and sat down. Training began with a sequence of logins and checklists. His supervisor introduced herself, and he nodded, mindful of every word, asking questions when he needed to, accepting help without apology. He learned to navigate the system, committing keystrokes to memory until the movement of his fingers felt like a new language settling into his bones. When he hit a wrong key, he corrected himself. When a pile of papers made a small mountain beside his keyboard, he stacked them in neat, sensible piles and created a map on a sticky note that only he could follow. He watched and listened. He held the elevator door for a colleague carrying an armful of folders and gathered the pens someone had dropped near the copier. He found quiet satisfaction in simple tasks. The steady scrape of a stapler, the soft rush of printed pages, the hum of voices from glass-walled rooms. At lunch, he sat in a break area by the window with his sandwich and an apple, looking at the sky that he had often crossed with a different urgency. He thought of his child and a cafeteria tray, of a drawing taped above a small desk at home, of a promise to show up and keep showing up. In the midst of an afternoon lull, a notification blinked on his screen. Company announcement, it read. He clicked it, and a message from the head of the company filled the display. He read each sentence slowly, afraid to miss anything. The note spoke about access and fairness, about the distance some people travel to stand in a room like this. It mentioned travel support for candidates who needed it. It spoke of providing ride vouchers, bus fare, and safe passage to interviews. It described new options that would allow a person to speak to a hiring team without sacrificing a full day of wages, and it offered flexible scheduling for those with caregiving responsibilities. It promised quiet rooms for anyone who might need a moment to collect themselves. It was the kind of policy that would never make the headlines but would change the contours of paths people walked. He sat back in his chair as a warm pressure rose behind his eyes. He kept his gaze steady on the screen and took a small breath through his nose. Around him, chairs creaked and murmurs spread as others read the announcement. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He knew what it meant because there had been a morning when the choice to show up demanded more than the hours between sunrise and sunset. It had demanded everything. Later, as the day thinned, the head of the company passed by with a small group from leadership. A nod found him from across the aisle. It carried recognition but not spectacle, and he returned it with a slight bow of his head that said thank you in a language he did not have to speak aloud. He kept working. He responded to messages, checked data twice before submitting, and finished a task list that would look unimpressive to anyone chasing applause. It felt, to him, like a bridge built carefully over a river he had crossed without one. Evening reached into the office with long shadows. He stopped by the supply closet for a new notepad, tucked it into his bag, and stepped back into the city with a posture that had shifted just slightly over the course of the day. On the sidewalk, the air held a hint of coming rain, and a bus hissed at the curb. He walked home with quick strides, feeling the relief of work done and the pull of home. When he opened the apartment door, the scene that met him unraveled his practiced composure. A paper banner hung crookedly over the table, handwritten letters crawling across it in a bright crayon whisper. A plate held a cake from the corner bakery, small and imperfect, with frosting that tried very hard to behave. His child stood beside it, cheeks flushed with pride, arms flung wide as if to gather the whole apartment into a hug. He set his bag down and scooped his child up, spinning once before setting them on a chair. They had prepared a few simple things to eat, food that tasted the way comfort feels when it shows up at the door. They clinked plastic cups filled with juice and laughed when the bubbles tickled their noses. He told a few careful stories about the day, leaving out the aching parts, amplifying the moments of warmth. A colleague who shared an umbrella to the train. A receptionist who had taped a small note with a welcome message on his monitor. The plant that leaned toward the light as if to say, "Keep going." After dinner, they stood by the window and looked at the city, tracing the lines of traffic like veins of light. He mentioned the announcement from the company in simple terms. Help for those who needed to get to an interview. Options for parents so they would not have to choose between being there for their children and being seen by a hiring team. His child listened with serious eyes, and then asked if that meant other people would not have to walk as far. He swallowed and said he hoped so. He wanted to say more, to explain how a door that opens for one person can become a hallway for many, but the words felt too big for the room. He squeezed his child's shoulder instead. When it was time for bed, he read a story in a voice that softened as the little body next to him unfolded into sleep. He lingered a moment, watching the rise and fall that had guided so many of his choices, then returned to the kitchen. He washed dishes slowly, letting the warm water work the day from his hands. On the counter, his badge glinted beneath the light. The banner fluttered with the draft from the window, and the small cake waited with a gap cut from its side like a missing tooth. He sat with a pen and notepad and wrote what he needed to remember in the days ahead. Arrive early. Ask smart questions. Trust the pace that keeps you steady. But the list was short, because the truth was simpler than any plan. Show up. Be ready. Make the work clean. He thought of the announcement again, and a picture formed in his mind of the lobby, where a person might receive a voucher, with a smile that said, "We want you here." He pictured a candidate sitting in a quiet room to catch their breath before telling their story. He pictured a parent arranging an interview that did not collide with a school pickup time. The image filled him with a gratitude that refused to be dramatic. It settled instead like a hand on his back, steady and warm. Before he turned out the lights, he placed the badge in his bag and touched the crayon letters on the banner, as if they were a blessing. The apartment returned to its gentle hush. He stood for a long minute, gathering what the day had given, a beginning that did not feel like a fanfare, a job that would pay the rent, and more, a quiet celebration that would become a memory, and a trace of his footprints now charted into company policy, winding away from him and towards strangers he would never meet. He lay down with that thought in his pocket, the future rolling toward him at a pace he could keep.